Okay, here we go. Welcome to the discussion tonight on BYP Esoteric Studies. Um, this one is an interesting one because we're going to compare and integrate two rebels with a cause, William Blake and J.R.R. Tolkien, the Rebellion of Imagination. These are our prophets of re-enchantment, and we want to talk about this tonight. The two thresholds of modernity. Here's the context. Every few centuries, the human mind must revolt against the prison that it has built for itself. In the late 18th century, that prison was reason enthroned, a mechanistic universe wound up by Newton, interpreted by Locke, and cataloged by the encyclopedists. Nature was no longer alive, it was an equation. Into that sterile, lifeless light stepped William Blake. From 1757 to 1827 was his life. Copperplate engraver and prophet. To his contemporaries, he looked half mad, kind of like Nietzsche did with his. To history, he stands as the first romantic seer. His vision was more far-sighted. I just invented a new word. Far-sighted. We need to be far-sighted than we are, definitely. Blake was more far-sighted than most of his contemporaries. Blake's cry, all religions are one, and there is no natural religion, was not a polite disagreement with empiricism. It was a trumpet blast. The reality is, imagination is divine knowledge. Well, a century and a half later, another Englishman, John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, from 1892 to 1973. He raised a quieter but equally defiant banner. The world had changed its machinery, but not its spirit by Tolkien's time. The Newtonian gears had become industrial engines. The laboratory had become the factory, and the new idols were called progress and efficiency. 2 world wars, mechanized slaughter, and the flattening of faith had left the Western soul exhausted, but not defeated. Tolkien's answer was not a manifesto, but a mythology. Through the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings, he offered a counter-cosmos, creation as song, art as participation, and humility as power. Like Blake, he too was a prophet crying in a wasteland. His cry just happened to take the form of elvish music and hobbit laughter. Blake's revolt, the poetic genius versus the machine mind. Blake looked around Enlightenment London, and he saw a universe without a soul. The philosophers had traded vision for mere measurement. Newton had put nature to the rack. To Blake, this was blasphemy. The infinite compressed into a diagram. So he announced the first principle of his gospel. The poetic genius is the true man, and that the body or outward form of man is derived from the poetic genius. In that single sentence, he reversed the entire Enlightenment. Instead of spirit emerging from matter, matter is the condensation of imagination. The creative act is not a metaphor, it is ontology. The poetic genius is for Blake the indwelling Christ, the living Logos, the energy of creation. all religions are one because every prophet, every myth, every art is a different translation of that single frame and flame. There is no natural religion because the natural seen without imagination is unreal. It's a corpse mistaken for a man. So Blake's enemies were not scientists as such, but it was the philosophy of dead vision. Newton's single vision, Bacon's empiricism, and Locke's sensory reduction. Against their instruments, he set a new instrument, the human imagination, through which eternity perceives itself. Tolkien's revolt is the sub-creator versus the machine. Tolkien's century was the full bloom of what Blake foresaw. The single vision had grown into a world system, mechanized war, totalitarian politics, industrial blight. The same impulse that measured the stars now counted bodies. To Tolkien, this was the reign of the machine, not mere technology, but the will to dominate. The machine, he wrote, is our attempt to make the will more effective by externalizing it by magic. Like Blake, Tolkien saw that the root disease was spiritual, the divorce of imagination from reverence. In Middle-earth, that disease wears many names: Morgoth, Sauron, Saruman, but always the same face: the lust to replace creation rather than serve it. Today, its names are legion: the self-appointed and anointed savior politicians who trade truth for arrogant control, moguls who hoard the world's lifeblood, the architects of endless consumption and conflict, and leaders who build engines of war and call them progress. Those who wield power without wonder and wealth without wisdom. Yet beneath their titles, it's the same ancient spirit that both Blake and Tolkien opposed: the imagination severed from reverence. Today's evil is ambition, gluttonous greed, and damning domination. But its spirit is one: the will to replace creation rather than serve it. Tolkien's cure was subcreation. Man, he argued, in On Fairy Stories, is made in the image of a maker. Therefore, when we invent worlds, we do not flee reality. We echo its author. In every true tale, there is a hidden Eucharist, the creature offering back the gift of creativity. His imagination, unlike Blake's, remains sacramental rather than idealist. The world is real and good, but it needs to be re-seen. The purpose of fantasy is recovery, to cleanse the doors of perception until we see the ordinary as holy once more. So there are two revolutions and one fire. The aspect of the dominant worldview resisted in Blake was the Enlightenment rationalism and empiricism. In Tolkien, it was the industrial modernism and positivism. The symbol of error for Blake was Newton's clockwork cosmos, yet for Tolkien, it was the machine and industrial domination. The aspect of the organ of truth for Blake is the imagination, the poetic genius. For Tolkien, it is the subcreative imagination, what he labeled as fairy. The nature of divinity for Blake was God within. Imagination is the divine man. In Tolkien, it is God beyond, yet mirrored, creator reflected in creature. The mode of salvation for Blake was vision, seeing through the senses into infinity. For Tolkien, it is recovery, seeing the created world as sacrament. The literary vehicle for Blake would be prophetic aphorism and illuminated poem. For Tolkien, it is myth and fairy story. The final goal for Blake would be the awakening of the infinite human whom he called Albion. For Tolkien, the restoration of harmony between the maker and the made. Each rebellion answers the same metaphysical wound, the disenchantment of the world. Blake sought to heal it from within by realizing the world is imagination. Tolkien sought to heal it from without by showing the imagination reveals the world's divine depth. In both, the imago Dei is creative power. So on the theology of imagination, there is a theology of imagination. For Blake, to imagine is to incarnate. Jesus is the imagination. For Tolkien, to imagine is to imitate. We make because we are made. Their difference is metaphysical, but their consequence is identical. Imagination is a mode of truth, not of escape. The poet and the myth maker are priests of perception, we could say. They reconnect what analysis divides: reason and wonder, matter and spirit, human and divine. Both reject the nihilism of a world explained but not understood. Blake said, if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. Tolkien said, by the art of the sub-creator, we may indeed say, behold, it is very good. Now, the modern parallel of our age of data and distraction is very instructive here. Today, the machine roars louder than ever. Algorithms have replaced angels. We measure stars with satellites, but forget to wonder. The modern world is both Newtonian and industrial. Blake's and Tolkien's nightmares have been fused together. Yet their vision endures precisely because it names our hunger. The thirst for meaning amid mechanism. When we read Jerusalem or The Lord of the Rings, we remember that knowledge is sterile without vision, and that imagination is not childish and foolish, but it is divine and uplifting. The greatest scientist of the last century, Albert Einstein, intoned in all seriousness, science without religion is lame, religion without science is blind. He meant that science gives us means, but not meaning. Religion gives values, but not verification. Each needs the other to walk upright. He also said elsewhere that the most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and all science. He further intoned, and which we ignore, imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited, whereas imagination embraces the entire world. So in essence, Einstein stands right beside Blake and Tolkien. Blake cried that reason without vision is bondage. Tolkien showed that technology without wonder becomes tyranny. Einstein warned that science without awe is crippled. So each in his own language defends the same truth, and that truth is that knowledge must be wed to imagination or it loses its soul. They truly teach that to see truly is to love truly. Every act of imagination and imaginative attention, and it doesn't matter what it is, painting, poetry, music, myth, all of it is a small resurrection of the world's soul. So from an esoteric standpoint, these men are initiates of the same mystery, the creative imagination as the bridge between the worlds. Blake's poetic genius corresponds to the hermetic nous, the inner spark through which the one manifests the many. The Neoplatonists called the nous the intellect and mind of God. Tolkien's sub-creator echoes the Logos doctrine, the word through whom all things were made, mirrored in every artist. Blake's Albion and Tolkien's Arda, well, these are both microcosm and macrocosm. The divine imagination projected into form, fallen, and awaiting redemption through creative participation. So reading them side by side is a form of initiation for us. We enter our own initiation of the mysteries of redemption through reading the works of William Blake and J.R.R. Tolkien. From passive sight to active vision, which we then put to use in our lives. From consuming stories to co-creating reality through love. And this is why it does matter for us to read the world's great literatures this way. That's not antiquarian. It is spiritual hygiene. We recover the faculty that keeps the soul alive. When imagination withers, society becomes mechanical. When imagination awakens, compassion and beauty and purpose come back. Intellect without imagination breeds cynicism. Faith without imagination breeds dogma. Technology without imagination breeds tyranny. Blake and Tolkien remind us that the cure for despair is vision, not fantasy that denies the world, but imagination that redeems it. The act of reading or painting, composing, dreaming, all of these are done with reverence, is the rehearsal of creation itself. Every time we enter the world of fairy, which is a mindset, or we open Blake's illuminated pages, we step back into the cosmic workshop. We remember that we too are artisans of being. Blake cried to his century, "I must create a system or be enslaved by another man's." Tolkien replied to his century, "Subcreation is the most nearly divine activity that man can perform." And to ours, they speak together. Do not surrender the imagination to the machine. Cleanse the doors of perception, recover the light in the leaves, see the infinite in every finite thing. For the poetic genius and the fairy are still alive and vibrant. They are an epic story of truth, waiting in every human heart, the twin flames of the same eternal fire. To tend that fire is not an escape, it is salvation. And in that tending, as Blake and Tolkien both knew, we rediscover ourselves as co-creators of the living cosmos. We've brought the three great defenders of the living imagination into the same cathedral of thought. Blake's angel of fire, Tolkien's angel of light, and Einstein's angel of wonder. Blake proclaimed that imagination is divine, the poetic genius itself. Tolkien revealed that imagination is sacred, the mirror of the Creator's joy. Einstein showed that imagination is essential, the true source of discovery. Together they stand at three pillars of the same temple. Blake lighting the flame of vision, Einstein expanding it through inquiry, Tolkien sanctifying it in story. All three remind us that knowledge without wonder is sterile, and that the universe, whether measured, sung, or painted, lives only through the awakened imagination. And they sing in harmony what our dismal age needs again. We are carrying on their important work, restoring awakened vision to a world that has forgotten that it can see. So thanks for watching the Backyard Professor Esoteric Studies. I'll have a lot more to you soon as I find more to share with you to hopefully uplift, to build our souls and spirits, and to let us see that we too can live a life full of love and joy and satisfaction. I'll catch you next time.